Pesachim, Dafim Lamed Daled through Mem. On Daf Lamed Daled, the Gemara brings a discussion about Hesach Hadas for Truma. Truma is supposed to be Mishmeres, supposed to be guarded and watched. If a person is Mesiach Das from the Truma, he removes his focus from it, he doesn't think about it, Truma becomes Psula. Why is it Psula? Machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says Psul HaGuf. That is a Psul. The absence of Hesach Hadas itself renders the Truma Psula. Rabbi Yochanan says it's a Psul Tumah. If you weren't focused on it, we suspect it may have become Tmeya. So it's not a new Psul, it just means that we have to be concerned that it became Tmeya. Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz in his Daf talked about the idea of Hesach Hadas for a woman who's counting Zayin Nikim, a Zava Gedola. Today, all our women count as though they're Zava Gedola. Woman has to count 7 clean days. There's a major discussion in the Achronim. If a woman is Mesiach Das, Mesiach Das, she stops thinking about her Zayin Nikim, she just forgets, decides not to count anymore, she thinks she's Tmeya, different reasons why she wouldn't count. She's Mesiach Das, and then she wants to continue her count. Is that a problem or not? So the Me'il Tzedakah was the stringent one. Me'il Tzedakah said it's a problem for 2 reasons. First, he said that you have to have Sfira, you have to count the Zayin Nikim, just like Sfira Se'omer, you have to actually count. There's even a question, why don't you make a bracha on it? Some poskim actually recommend that a woman should actually count verbally Zayin Nikim. We don't make a bracha, but you actually have to count. So since she was Mesiach Das, she stopped counting, so she doesn't have her Sfira of Zayin Nikim. And the other reason, he says, is a reason that's similar to our sugya, that if you're Mesiach Das, that means that she might have had Riyas Dam. She wasn't paying attention, so she didn't notice it. She might have had Hargasha and not been paying attention. So it's sort of like our sugya, sort of like Rabbi Yochanan's reason that it's a chashash tuma. It's possible that she saw a dam. So the Me'il Tzedakah says not only can't you count those days that she was Mesiach Das, the entire minyan falls away. She has to restart counting again after the Hesach Hadas. Other poskim disagree. Other Achronim say that there's no such psul, that she probably, even when she wasn't paying attention, you don't have to have an actual sfira, and even if she wasn't paying attention, she would have noticed the dam. So that there's not a problem of Hesach Hadas. Some poskim say a compromised position. She can't count the days where she was actually Mesiach Das, but she can still count the days before she was Mesiach Das. So there are different opinions about this. In a tshuva of the Marsham, in a Hagar from the grandson of the Marsham, he brings the position of the Beis Shlomo. The Beis Shlomo says that even according to the stringent view that Hesach Hadas in Sfira Zayin Nikim is a problem, he says that's only if she was completely Mesiach Das. But let's say a woman has a shaila. So if she decided she's Tmeya, the shaila is done, she's doomed, and she just completely decides she's not counting, that's Hesach Hadas. And that's a problem according to the Me'il Tzedakah and numerous Gedolei Achronim that are machmer for his view. However, the Beis Shlomo says if she was going to ask a question, she knew it was an issue, so she decided to ask the shaila, but provisionally she knew it might be a problem. But in the meantime, she knew that it might be okay. So the Beis Shlomo says that in such a case, if it turned out that the shaila was okay, that's not called Hesach Hadas. So the grandson of the Marsham, he says he has a raya, and the raya is from a passage in the Yerushalmi on our sugya of Hesach Hadas of Truma. Hesach Hadas of Truma, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is a concern that the Truma became Tmeya. So the Yerushalmi says, if a person had a shaila about the Truma, and the shaila later turned out to be okay. So if it's Ein Dato Li Shail, he was not planning on asking a shaila about it, he wrote it off, that's called Hesach Hadas. However, if it was Dato Li Shail, if he planned on asking about investigating the question, that's not a Hesach Hadas. So too, in the Shuvas Marsham, the grandson writes, here too, we can make the same argument, that if the woman planned on asking the shaila, even though she knew there was a good chance she was Tmeya, that's Hesach Hadas, according to the Me'il Tzedakah and his group, and then she has a problem. But if she was not planning on asking a shaila, then she's Mesiach Das entirely, and then she's Tmeya. But if she was planning on asking a shaila, even though she knew she might be Tmeya, then just like Daito Li Shail, the Yerushalmi says it's not called Hesach Hadas, here too, if the woman plans on asking a question, she asked the question, she plans on asking the question, she didn't decide that she was definitely Tmeya, that's not called Hesach Hadas, and even according to the Me'il Tzedakah, she would not forfeit her spirit. On Daf Lamed Hey, the Mishnah talks about the species of grain out of which you can make matzah. It says there are 5 species, the famous Chameshes Aminim of grain, Chitim, Seorim, Kusmin, Shifon, Shibol, Shuol. There are 5 grains. These are 5 grains that you make mizonos on, that you that you say Brachas Hamazon on, many halachas. In particular, one of the most important halachas is these are the only 5 grains you're allowed to make matzah out of. So wheat and barley, chitim and se'orim are obvious. The other 3 are kusmin, shifon, and shibola shul. What are they? The Gemara already asked this question. The Gemara brings a brisa that gives some explanation. Kusmin is min chitim. Kusmin is a form of wheat. The other 2, shibola shul and shifon, are min se'orim, are forms of barley. Matzahs have universally been made out of wheat. The Rama actually brings a halacha that a person should, lechatchila, the minhag is lechatchila to make matzah out of wheat. However, it's a clear Mishnah, it's a clear halacha, you can make matzah out of the other 4 types of grain as well. Several decades ago, they began to produce oat matzah. Traditionally, some Rishonim say, Rashi, other Rishonim say, and the poskim, the later poskim, the Achronim universally accept that shibola shul is oats. So several decades ago, people began to make matzah out of oats. Again, lechatchila make matzah out of wheat, but there are some people can't eat wheat. They have celiacs, they have wheat allergies, the reasons they can't eat wheat. So for them to be able to eat matzah, they began making matzah out of oats on the assumption, the consensus of the poskim is that shibola shul is oats. Some of the scholars and the achronim who are sympathetic to modern scholarship had serious problems with this identification. Professor Felix, who was an expert on Samech, V'achai, B'Mishnah, B'Mikra, he argued that shibola shul is definitely not oats. There are several arguments, including from Talmudic sources, why it would not be. Professor Felix argues that shibola shul is actually a grain called in Latin segala, 2-road barley, a type of barley. But first of all, our Gemara itself, our Gemara says that shibola shul, along with shifon, is min sa'orim, it's a type of barley. Oats have nothing to do with barley. Oats don't resemble barley. Oats are a completely different grain. They're not a type of barley. Furthermore, in Kilayim, it talks about the shibola shul, shifon, and barley can all crossbreed. That's apparently not true for oats, but it is true for segala. So there are all these various arguments against the idea that shibola shul is actually oats, and therefore Professor Felix said oats are not shibola shul. Oats are not one of the 5 grains that you can make matzah from, and therefore you're not yotzi the mitzvah of matzah with oats. You cannot make matzah out of oats. Period. Full stop. Most poskim, most of the major poskim have rejected this view. Rav Yashuv, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Adi Yosef. Most of the poskim have strongly rejected this view. They said the traditional assumption, based on Rashi and other Rishonim, is that shibola shul is oats, and you can eat it with a clear conscience for matzah. But again, we do have Rishonim who did not identify shibola shul as oats, and there are strong arguments against it. So the question is, may a person really eat oats for matzah? May a person really eat oats for matzah or not? So some of the poskim were actually sympathetic to the view that one should avoid it. Rav Hershel Schachter apparently takes seriously the view that shibola shul might not be oats. He says the minhag is that people who have celiac, people who really can't eat wheat, can eat oat matzah. But certainly he says someone who could eat wheat should really not eat oats, because it's not really clear that oats are really shibola shul. Furthermore, for someone who can eat wheat, someone who's able to eat wheat, the Rama says that a person, wheat is preferable. Why is wheat preferable? One reason the Mishnah Berurah brings is because wheat is tastier. Wheat is the most delicious and most enjoyable matzah. So hiddur mitzvah, you should eat the best kind of matzah. Obviously, that's not relevant to someone who can't eat wheat, who has celiacs or something else. But furthermore, some posts can bring, the Marsham, the Minchas Yitzchak, they bring this actually a chametz problem. Of course, you can actually make matzah of any of the 5 grains. But we're not so expert. We don't know how to do it. We're used to wheat. We have the process for wheat down pat. We know exactly what we're doing. But there are indications from the Gemara that they bring that the chametz works differently for each grain. We don't have so much experience with the other grains, and therefore, once you leave the time-honored standard practice of making matzah out of wheat, there are chametz concerns, and therefore, lechatchila, it is strongly encouraged that one eat matzah with wheat. If one can't, so there's really a question. So the consensus of major poskim is that we follow the traditional assumption that shibola shul is oats, and you can eat oat matzah, but a number of poskim are not entirely convinced. Rabbi Jachter reports, Rav Schachter said if there's a great need, you can eat oat matzah. Not entirely lechatchila. Rav Schachter apparently wasn't even convinced you should make a mizonos on oat product, Cheerios. He recommended you eat something else with them to avoid the bracha shaila. Rav Schachter takes very seriously apparently the possibility that it is not necessarily the shibola shul, one of the 5 grains. Rav Aaron Lichtenstein is reported as saying that the minhag is you can follow the minhag that it's oats unless you have proof, even though he's not convinced Professor Felix is wrong. Some have tried to argue that it's a shalav deraisa. Eating matzah today is deraisa, and brachal vatalos. One really should try hard to be choshesh for the opinion that it may not be oats. If you want a solution for a celiac, so Rabbi Michael Broyd argues that according to what he understands, even people who have celiacs can eat very small quantities of wheat. It won't harm them if they eat a very small amount. We paskin you can mix wheats with oat and it's still considered matzah as long as it has tam chitim and tam matzah. B'shas tzorech, you don't even have to have a full kazayas of the wheat. So he says, he spoke to food experts, and he says if you have 90% rice and 10% wheat, you still have tam matzah, and it's less than 3 grams of wheat per matzah. Even celiacs can eat that, even though it's kitnios, of course, but he says better to be yotzi the daraisa of eating matzah and be lenient on kitnios than to be stringent on kitnios and eat oats, which there's a very real concern he feels may not actually be valid matzah midaraisa. In any event, though, the consensus of mainstream poskim is that most mainstream poskim, Rav Shechter being a notable exception, is that we can assume unequivocally that Shibboleth Shul is oats. Although Rav Shechter says it's a real question and it should be avoided unless necessary. On Daf Lamed Vav, the Gemara mentions lechem oni. The Torah describes matzah as lechem oni. Lechem oni means to exclude. You can't use for matzah that is needed with yayin, shemen, or dvash, with wine or oil or honey. Those are rich doughs, rich bread. That's not lechem oni. Poor man's bread is simple flour and water. There are actually a number of Gemaras that discuss matzah made with liquids or other ingredients other than water and flour. Back on Lamed Hey, the Gemara says, Rish Lakish said, Isa sheni losha b'yayin b'shemen udvash. If you have dough that was mixed, kneaded with the wine, oil, or honey, you're not chayav kares for eating that. It's not considered chametz. It's not that you're not chayav kares. The implication is it might still be a question of chametz midrabanan, but you're not chayav kares for it. Not so clear. Our Gemara seems to say it's fine. You just can't eat it for lechem oni. You can't eat it for matzah, for the kazayas of the seder, the first 2 nights. The kazayas for achilas matzah, you can't eat it, but it implies that it's okay. It's not chametz. Later, the Gemara says, also on Lamed Vav, Ein Loshin Isa b'Pesach b'Yayin b'Shemen udvash. You can't make doughs out of wine, with wine, honey, and oil. And if you do, Rabbi Gamliel says you have to burn it. It might be chametz. You have to burn it. You should burn it. You can't keep it around. The Chum say you shouldn't do it, but yochel, you can eat it. So that's another question about whether it's chametz or not. And later on Daf Mem, the Gemara says mei peros ein machmitzin. If you make a dough out of mei peros, out of various fruit juices, ein machmitzin, such a dough does not become chametz. So we have all these various contradictory statements, conflicting statements about whether mei peros and flour is chametz. It's not chametz. It's certainly not lechem oni. But can you eat it the rest of Pesach? This is a major debate among the Rishonim. There are a number of different positions in how to reconcile all these Gemaras. Rashi says, like Reish Lakish, you're not chayav kares. However, it can be chametz, and it can be a form of chametz nuksha. It's a lesser form of chametz, and you're not allowed to make matzah out of, you're not allowed to make doughs out of anything other than water. Shitas Arif is that everything is fine, it is not chametz at all. You can't eat it for the seder, for lechem oni, but it is not chametz at all with mei peros with water, mei peros without water. It's never chametz, it's just not lechem oni. Some say that mei peros without water is not machmetz, is fine, so it's not a problem at all. Mei peros with water, if you mix in water to the fruit juices, then it does become chametz, and it becomes chametz even faster. You don't get the full 18 minutes. You have to be extra stringent and extra careful with such a mixture, and that is how we paskin in the Shulchan Aruch. Mechaber paskins, mei peros below mayim. If you make a dough out of fruit juice with no water, ein machmitzin klal, it cannot become chametz at all. You can leave it longer than 18 minutes, not a problem at all. Shas a kol hayom, you can sit around all day out of the oven, no chametz at all. Can't use it for the seder because it's not lechem oni. But other than that, it's perfectly fine. However, mei peros with water we paskin, like that sheet of the Balei Tosfos, mei peros with water is machmetz, and is machmetz faster, and you shouldn't do it at all. L'chatchila, you shouldn't make it at all because it's too dangerous. It can become chametz. If you made it, but the avid, you can eat it. That's the sheet of the mechaber. You still can't eat it for the seder because it's not lechem oni, with water, without water, as long as it has mei peros. Mishnah Berurah brings, as long as there's any taste of the fruit juice, as long as the tam is nirgash, it's not lechem oni. L'chatchila, you shouldn't do it at all if there's water because it can become chametz quickly, but b'diavad, it's okay, just not for the seder. That's the sheet of the mechaber. The Ramah says the minhag in our medinas, in our countries, the minhag is, he says, we don't make matzah even out of pure meiperos, without water, even though the Mechaber said that's fine, it's not machmet, you can leave it out the whole day. We don't do that. Why not? So there are two reasons for the minhag. One reason is because there are some Rishonim who say that even meiperos without water is machmetz and is machmetz fast, so any meiperos is a potential problem of chametz. Also, we're choshesh to some water, 100% fruit juice. Maybe it's not 100% fruit juice. Truth in labeling, they allow some water. Maybe there is some water in there. So if there is water, it's machmetz fast. So we Ashkenazim, we don't use matzah on Pesach with any water, with meiperos at all. Even if we think there's no water, certainly if there is water, we don't make such matzah on Pesach at all. As Fardim are more mekil, but Ashkenazim, we're strict about it. We're strict that we don't eat such matzah on Pesach. We don't eat such matzah on Erev Pesach after the time at which you can no longer eat chametz. You can only eat chametz the first 4 hours of the day. So we don't eat matzah made with meiperos, with or without water, after 4 hours in Erev Pesach. The classic example of this is egg matzah. Egg matzah is made without water, with eggs, or if there's fruit juices or other types of chocolate-covered matzah, white grape matzah, other types of matzah that are made with liquids other than water. For Ashkenazim, we are strict. We won't eat them on Pesach. We won't even eat them on Erev Pesach after 4 hours into the day. The Ramah does say, though, it's only a chumrah. So for a choleh, for a zaken, someone who's elderly and it's hard to eat other food, someone who's sick, so we're lenient. So we certainly can have them in our house on Pesach. You don't have to get rid of them. You can even eat them for someone who has a need for them. But ordinary healthy people, among Ashkenazim, do not eat egg matzah on Pesach and not even on Erev Pesach after 4 hours into the day. On Daf Lamed Zayin, the Gemara begins on the end of Lamed Vav, continues on to Lamed Zayin. The Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, we don't make thick bread. We don't make bread that's tefach. How thick is thick? Rav Huna says, tefach, like the lechem apanim. Lechem apanim were a tefach thick, and they were matzah, they were not chametz, but we don't make it thicker than that. There is some question about whether maskana the Gemara, at the conclusion, we paskin the shir tefach or not, but the Shulchan Aruch paskins this way. Einos in the Pesach pas of a tefach. We don't make bread that's a tefach thick. We less than a tefach is mutter. Mishnah Berurah brings that some say even less than a tefach he shouldn't do, based on how they understand the conclusion of the sugya. But lechatchila, we certainly don't make matzah that's a tefach thick, and lechatchila the Mishnah Berurah brings, according to many poskim, that we don't even make matzah that is less than a tefach thick, half a tefach thick. We don't make either. The Ramah elsewhere comments that matzah should be rikikin, they should be thinnish. The low pas of not thick like other bread. Ki ena rikikin mamarin lahachmetz. Thinner matzah won't become chametz as easily as thicker matzah. Mishnah Berurah explains that the Ramah is adding something. We already know that you can't make matzah that's a tefach thick. So the Ramah is telling you, he says that half a tefach, 3/4 of a tefach is fine according to the Gemara, is fine according to the Shulchan Aruch. Mishnah Berurah says some Rishonim are machmer, but the Shulchan Aruch paskin that less than a tefach is fine. Ramah is telling you, you shouldn't resort to that. Matzah should be much thinner, shouldn't be half a tefach, let's say. They should be less than that. How thin should they be? The Berhete brings from the Beis Hillel, the minhag was to make matzah an etzba thick. An etzba is 1/4 of a tefach, they say it's about an inch or so. So they used to make matzah that was an inch thick, much thicker than our thin cracker matzah. The Sfardim, some of the Sfardim and the Yemenites even today make their traditional matzahs are more pizza-like or lafa-like. They are thicker. They're probably not as thick as an etzba, but they are thicker. The minhag used to be like that even among Ashkenazim. At some point, over the last several centuries, the minhag became to make these super thin matzahs, the hard cracker matzahs that we have. There are two significant changes. First of all, we make them really, really thin. Again, Medina de Gemara, Shulchan Aruch paskins tefach. Less than a tefach is okay, the Shulchan Aruch paskins. Ramah says rikikin, make them thinner. And we make them today, not even an etzba, super thin. We make them less than an etzba and even cracker thin. So soft and hard is not really discussed by the poskim. As we said, some of the Sfardim and the Yemenites make these soft pizza-like matzahs. Ashkenazim make their matzahs crunchy and cracker-like. Is that really a halacha? Do you have to do that? So contemporary poskim debate this. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, Mikra din, you can make them thicker as well, he says, but our matzahs are made very thin. Ashkenazim should stick to that. He doesn't discuss hard and soft, but he says Ashkenazim should stick to the custom of making matzahs not thicker than we do today, and Ashkenazi should not make the Svardi style matzahs. Rav Asher Weiss says soft matzah should really be fine. There's nothing in the halacha that says matzahs have to be crunchy. However, he says, maybe we don't know how to do it, he says. We're not experts in making them soft and thick and guarding against chimutz. We're worried about chametz, he says. Maybe that's why Ashkenazim started making them so thin and hard, to avoid any possibility of chametz, because they felt it was difficult to get the technique down properly. Apparently the Yemenites, the Sephardim, know how to do it. They make them very fast, they have a way of doing it, but we Ashkenazim may have lost the technique, or we don't trust ourselves. So the minhag is to make them both thin and crunchy, he says. Innovating in mitzvahs, Rav Asher is nervous about innovations in mitzvahs. Al titosh taras yimecha, he says, and Pesach, it's good to be machmer, so we Ashkenazim should stick to our super thin and super crunchy matzahs. Rav Hershel Schachter disagrees. He says that there is no minhag whatsoever about eating crunchy matzahs. It's just a style, he says. Spongy is perfectly fine. It's like changing the color of a paroches. It's not a minhag, he says. The fact that shuls have done it one way, that's not a minhag, he says. Even thin, he said. When the Ramah said thin, the Ramah meant you shouldn't do a full etzbah. You shouldn't do a tefach. You shouldn't do a full etzbah. Make them thin, but not cracker thin. The pita, a spongy, thin matzah is fine. So that's a machlokes among contemporary poskim, whether Ashkenazim should stick to their super thin and super crunchy matzahs, or whether they would be allowed to eat like the Sephardim, pretty thin and softer, not fully crunchy like we do. On Daf Lamed Ches, the Gemara begins discussing the question of shmura matzah that is shmura, that is guarded from chametz. The Gemara brings a drasha. Pasuk says, "Ushmar temes hamatzos," you shall guard the matzahs. So it has to be matzah mishtameres l'shem matzah. The matzah needs active shmira, actively guarded by humans from chametz. It also has to be l'shem matzah. It has to be. There are different interpretations of this. L'shem mitzvah, for the mitzvah of matzah, the kizayis you eat the first 2 nights, or l'shem matzah, just l'shem matzah in general. But the Gemara says, Yatsa sazu, matzah that was made for the bread of a carbon toda, Yatsa sazu, she'en mishtameres, l'shem matzah el l'shem zebach. The bread of the toda, the lechem of the toda was made for carbon and not for matzah. So even though it was shamer, that's supposed to be matzah also, and not chametz. It certainly was guarded, but if it was guarded for the wrong reason, that's not good. So you need shmira, and you need shmira l'shem, either matzah or mitzvah, different shitas in the Rishon. The continuation of this Gemara is on Daf Mem. The Gemara talks in more detail about the halachos of shmura. The Gemara there, it's a difficult sugya, numerous different interpretations of the Rishonim. The Gemara there talks about shmira from different points. It talks about shmira from lisha, from when you start kneading the dough, you put the water into the flour, be shummered from then, or from much earlier, from an earlier stage in the process. It's not clear what the maskana is. There are different opinions in the Rishonim how to understand these sugyas. The Rif says you need shmura mishas ktsira, from when the wheat is harvested. That's when it can become chametz. We said last week that some say even before it's harvested, once the wheat is fully ripened, even while it's still attached to the ground, it can become chametz. But the Rishonim say the earliest share we find in the Rishonim is mishas ktsira, from when you harvest the wheat and need shmura from then. That Rava told people who were processing the wheat, the mahafri, kipi, when you do this early processing way back before the kneading, you should already do that l'shem mitzvah. So Rava says you need shmura mishas ktsira. The Rif understands. That's how the Rif paskins, like Rava, even though the Gemara says that the Gemara challenges what Rava said. The Gemara says Rava was lo hadrbe. Rava still persisted in his opinion, and that's how the Rif paskins that you need shmura mishas ktsira. That's how the Rif paskins you need shmura mishas ktsira to avoid water. The Rif holds l'shem matzah, not l'shem mitzvah, but you need active human shmira, at least l'shem matzah from ktsira. The Rosh says mishas tchina, from the grinding. Why the grinding? Because they used to grind in water mills, and there was a concern that water could splash on the wheat, could splash on the flour. So you need shmura from then, because that's when there's a real concern that the wheat can become chametz. Other poskim paskin that shmura mishas fleisha is enough, like the other position in the Gemara, that the shmura mishas fleisha, when you actually put the water in, that's when you have to worry about chametz. All these 3 stages are brought in Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says that tov, the best thing is to do shmura from shas ktsira. L'pachus, at least he says, do it mishas tchina. So tov to do like the Rif from shas ktsira. At least he says l'pachus like the Rosh from shas tchina. B'shas v'tchak, you can buy commercial flour from the street that wasn't shmura at all. You don't need shmura flour. As long as you start the shmira from putting the flour into the water, b'shas v'tchak, that is good enough. Furthermore, this whole discussion is about the matzah's mitzvah. The Shulchan Aruch paskins, this whole discussion is chitim she'osim behem matzah's mitzvah. The chitim that you eat for the kizayas matzah on the first 2 nights, that's the chita that needs shmura, whatever shmura means. Ktsira, tchina, lisha, that's what you need shmura. But the matzah that you eat the rest of Pesach doesn't need to be shmura at all. Mishnah Berurah brings from Pesahim the Achronim that that Yisrael Kedoshim Heim, that Jews like to do mitzvahs, Jews like to do things in a pious and preferable way, and we try to get shmura for the matzah we eat all Pesach. What kind of shmura do we try to get? Mishnah Berurah does not say shmura mishas k'tzira. He says that the kind of matzah we try to get for the rest of Pesach outside the first night is at least is mishas tchina from the grinding, and at least from shas lisha. At least, the very least, shmura mishas lisha. I was never entirely sure you can find matzah in the store that's labeled shmura, non-shmura, but kosher for Passover. I saw Rabbi Yirmiyahu Keganov says that when they label it shmura, commercially, when they label matzah shmura, that typically means shmura mishas k'tzira from the harvesting. Sometimes they write explicitly shmura mishas k'tzira. If they label it kosher for Pesach, non-shmura, that means shmura mishas tchina. And that would seem to satisfy the Mishnah Berurah, that for the rest of Pesach you can rely, Yisrael Kedoshim Heim, it's a chumrah to begin with, and the chumrah is to have matzah that's shmura from shas tchina. Today there are many people who try to get matzah for all of Pesach, all the matzah they eat on Pesach, to be shmura from shas k'tzira, from the harvesting. And there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, the Mishnah Berurah brings that the Vilna Gaon was very strict about this. The Vilna Gaon would insist on shmura mishas k'tzira for the entire Pesach. He says that the Gaon was stringent because he was concerned that even while the wheat was still attached, like as we discussed last week, and they might have come in contact with water after the wheat was mature. So the Gaon was very strict, not just for the Seder, but to have shmura mishas k'tzira for the entire Pesach. Some people are still strict about that today. But even Mishnah Berurah doesn't even bring that. Mishnah Berurah brings that, but what he calls Yisrael Kedoshim Heim is at least to do shmura mishas tchina, which apparently even non-shmura matzahs claim to be shmura mishas tchina for the rest of Pesach. The sheet of the Rif and the Rambam, though, is, as the Aruch HaShulchan discusses, as other Acharim discuss at length, is that they understand that the shmura l'shem matzah doesn't mean l'shem mitzvah, it means l'shem matzah, just for the sake of having kosher matzah. And according to them, there is indeed no distinction between the matzah, the Seder, and matzah for the rest of Pesach. So the Aruch HaShulchan writes at length, he says that even though it's true, the Shulchan Aruch paskin, some Rishonim paskin, that the Ikar Shmura is for the Seder, but according to the Rif and the Rambam, he says they understand Shmura would be a requirement for the matzah you eat all of Pesach, and the Aruch HaShulchan therefore recommends, he says, someone who wants to be Yotzei matzah in the desirable way, he should eat Shmura, which is Mishas K'tzira, for all of Pesach, like the Gaon did, because of in order to be Yotzei, the Rif and the Rambam, and the Gaon. So he says that I'm not sure if Gaon here means the Vilna Gaon or the sheet of some of the Gaonim who took this position, that in any event, so there are two reasons to be machmer for matzah shmura for the rest of Pesach. First of all, the Vilna Gaon's reason, he was concerned it was an actual chametz problem. It could have come in contact with water, so he wanted shmura mishas k'tzira. Also, the Aruch HaShulchan, based on the sheet of the Rif and the Rambam, says that the Iker din of the Gemara of matzah shmura is shmura mishas k'tzira, and there's no difference between the first night and the rest of Pesach, and therefore there are good reasons to be particular to eat matzah shmura for all of Pesach. Another application of these halachas the Shulchan Aruch brings, if you need shmira, you have to have positive human shmira with kavana. Therefore, a non-Jew cannot make the matzahs. We're machmer, even if a Jew is overseeing it, even if a Jew oversees it, we don't rely on that. We want the shmira to be done by the person actually making the matzahs. There's a machlokus whether this is deraisa or drabanan, but l'chatchila we want the people actually involved in the making the matzah to be Jewish and to be adults, and not to do it by ketanim. The bakeries try to use people who are Jewish, and they used to use people whose level of religious commitment was sometimes dubious. In recent years, there was some controversy about it. So today, some bakeries proudly label their packages that their matzahs are made by Shomrei Torah mitzvahs, because same way you're supposed to have a Jew, you're supposed to have Jews who are Shomrei Torah mitzvahs. But again, the Ikar halach is you can't use a non-Jew, and you should have to use an adult. An adult in halacha is someone who's bar bas mitzvah. A woman can do it certainly, but so there is a question. We mentioned whether this is deraisa or drabanan, and the din of shmira, and a ramification of that question is whether we rely on simple bar mitzvah. The halacha is when someone is 13 is not actually the defining the defining criterion for being an adult, for being a gadol or gedola in Judaism, you have to also demonstrate certain physical signs of maturation. Midrabanan, for things that are drabanan, we assume that if someone is 13, he's reached that level. Kol chazaka derava, that's why we let a bar mitzvah boy down for the amud without any further inspection, because midrabanan, once you're 13, we assume you reach that level of physical maturation. But for dinim deraisa, we don't rely on that. For dinim deraisa, we require a physical inspection that he's demonstrated these signs of puberty, of a certain level of physical maturation. Person has a beard, that's good enough. If he shaves, if he has facial hair, that's enough. Without that, it can be a real issue. So the Mishnah Berurah says that if you hold shmura as deraisa, a young teenager who doesn't shave shouldn't be allowed to make the matzahs until we inspect him and make sure that he has demonstrated these simanim of physical maturation. On Daf Lamed Tes, the Mishnah talks about, parallel to the Mishnah about matzah, the Mishnah says there are 5 types of vegetables you can use for mar. They are chazeres, tamcha, charchavina, ulshin, and mar. 5 types of vegetables. What are these vegetables? The Gemara tells us what they are. Chazeres is chasa, ulshin is hindavi, tamcha is tamachta, charchavina is atzvasa dedikla, and marar is marirta. Some of these, we know what they are. Chazeres, chasa, is lettuce. There is some question about what kind of lettuce it is. Israeli lettuce is not exactly the same as American lettuce. Some say it's romaine lettuce. Rav Aaron Kotler has apparently used iceberg lettuce. But it is pretty much universally assumed that chazeres, chasa, is lettuce. The ulshin is generally assumed to be endives. Tamachta, is commonly assumed by later poskim to be horseradish. That's why people use horseradish today for mar. But the identification, just as we discussed with oats and shibboleth shuel, here even more so, the identification of horseradish with tamcha is very dubious. Not clear that they even had horseradish in the time of the Mishnah, and the identification rests on much weaker traditional sources. It's a relatively late identification, later Rishonim, and so on. But Achronim pretty much universally assume, Ashkenazic Achronim certainly pretty much universally assume that tamcha is horseradish, but that identification is somewhat dubious. Now in Europe, they used to frequently use horseradish for maror because they didn't have lettuce. But if you do have lettuce is certainly preferable. First of all, because we know that chazeres is lettuce, and we're not exactly convinced that horseradish, according to some poskim at least, that horseradish is maror. Moreover, the Shulchan Aruch lists the five vegetables for maror. The Shulchan Aruch says, based on the Gemara, chazeres is preferable. The Gemara says chazeres is preferable. Why? The Gemara brings a couple of explanations. One is that chazeres is chasa, and chasa has an allusion to chas, the Aramaic word for rachmanos. Hashem had compassion on us and took us out of Mitzrayim. Also, it says that maror is tchilaso rach v'sofo kasha. Maror starts out being less bitter, being sweeter, but it gets bitter as it develops. So l'chatchila, chazeres is the preferred maror. Zeichel l'shibud Mitzrayim, and chazeres is l'chatchila. The Shulchan Aruch paskins that the ikar mitzvah b'chazeres, the ikar mitzvah is to use chazeres. If you don't have chazeres, you follow the sequence of that he gives, in which tamcha, maybe horseradish, is number 3. Lettuce is number 1. Lettuce is preferable. So certainly, mikra din, lettuce is preferable. Some of the achronim bemoan the fact that in Europe they ate horseradish. If they didn't have. They did the best they could. But in some European cultures and periods, they had lettuce and they still ate horseradish. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch was decried that. The Chacham Tzvi said that he understands people eat horseradish, He said some places lettuce wasn't available because it was too cold, or they weren't sure what the right species of lettuce is, he says, but he wasn't happy with this. Chasam Sofer actually felt that horseradish was a good idea because he was worried about bugs. He said the lettuce is infested with bugs. Bugs are an issur d'oraisa, he said. Marar b'zman hazeh, we have no current Pesach, marar is only drabanan. So the Chasam Sofer said, Mishnah Berurah brings this, Chalila, Chas v'shalom, to be lenient on eating bugs for the purpose of fulfilling a mitzvah drabanan. Certainly we have another option. We have horseradish, which is not bug infested. So they warn, if you're not checking your lettuce well, if you don't have pest-free lettuce, if you don't have someone who's a Yirei Shamayim who can check it, then better eat horseradish. But many poskim say that lettuce is really preferable, either because we're not even sure horseradish is marar, or because chazeres is number 1. They bring that the Shulchan Aruch Harav, the Aruch HaShulchan, and Moshe Feinstein all said lettuce is preferable to horseradish. Now there is some question about lettuce is not really bitter. Lettuce is a very enjoyable vegetable you put in salads. So there were some who held that you can only eat lettuce if it actually is somewhat bitter. Beis Yosef says you can eat lettuce even if it is sweet. There were poskim who held that lettuce actually has to be somewhat bitter. The Chazon Ish said that the lettuce should be should be left to mature. You should use more mature types of lettuce, which apparently become more bitter. You should use mature heads that have a bitter taste. Menashe Klein disagrees and says the minhag is to eat any lettuce. As Beis Yosef says, even if it's sweet, it's preferable. The aforementioned Akronim Shulchan Aruch Harav, Aruch HaShulchan, Ramosha all said lettuce, even sweet, is preferable to horseradish. Again, not entirely clear what lettuce you're supposed to use. Most people use romaine lettuce as far as I know, for maror. They bring Rav Aaron Kotler used to eat iceberg lettuce. And Rav Henkin said that we're not exactly sure what kind of lettuce is the right kind of lettuce. That's why he says horseradish is better. Rav Henkin held horseradish is definitely tamcha, and you can be confident in it. Lettuce not. I'll call upon it. Many poskim say lettuce is actually preferable. Some people have the minhag. Rav Soloveitchik, they say, have the minhag to eat some lettuce and some horseradish, some lettuce and some horseradish. There is a problem I once heard, though, that if you eat them together, some people put the horseradish on the lettuce and eat them together, that could again be a problem, because if you're concerned horseradish is not actually tamcha, and it's not maror, the Gemara talks about a problem of maror overpowering the taste of other things, or other things overpowering the taste of maror. So you don't want something which is not maror to be eaten together with maror that would overpower its taste. Horseradish can certainly overpower the taste of lettuce, so maybe you shouldn't eat them together. Some people have argued horseradish is really maror-like, it's really strong and really sharp. Others have, and lettuce is not. Other people have argued it's sharp, it's not bitter. Bitter is not the same as sharp. Horseradish is indeed really sharp, but it's not bitter. Neither is lettuce really. So it's hard to know. There are poskim on both sides of this, but there are many poskim who do say that lettuce is preferable because chazaris is preferable, and again, some people eat both, but certainly one has to avoid bugs, as per the Chasam Sofer and Mishnah Berurah. But if you can get bug-free lettuce, there are many poskim who say lettuce is preferable for maror over horseradish. On Daf Mem, we have some of the sugyas of meperos ein machmitzin and the sugya of shmira, which we already covered when we did Daf Lamed Vav and Daf Lamed Ches.